So this is part 3, and we're talking about Lady Hope and Charles Darwin. Specifically about an encounter that she had at the end of Charles Darwin's life, where she had been discussing the Bible with him and that he had been talking about Jesus, and she was at his home knowing that Charles Darwin was a believer, a born-again believer in Jesus. So, of course, she had, in writing this, it had gone nationwide and then gone over to Europe internationally, and it had provoked a lot of people over there, specifically Charles Darwin's family. And so, as they reacted, as being agnostics and atheists, they were very upset with her writing. In fact, they had wanted to have basically have the magazines post that it was a hoax, which they didn't. But anyway, and then of course the so-called scientific Society of Evolution, they could not bear that their hero, Darwin, had found Christ in the last part of his life. That was a total shock, and they would not believe that. So she came against a lot of warfare, let's just say that, in one little testimony that she wrote. And so again, we have the historians, and they are looking into now Charles Darwin's life. But of course, they're going to have to go and bring up this letter that was written by Lady Hope and prove in some way that it was a hoax. You can't just say something's a hoax without some evidence. And so the evidence that they finally found was a letter from another evangelist, a pastor of the Plymouth Brethren Church, namely James William Condon Fagan in 1852. And so he had supposedly written this letter, although it had been highly edited. And so this letter, if you took it into court, in a courtroom, it would have been thrown out because because it wasn't as considered original. But they still used this letter, especially Moore, who wrote the book labeled on Charles Darwin's life. And he looked into the historical perspective of evangelical Christians. Of course, he was not one, but he was there to basically criticize evangelicals in history. And so in bringing these letters up, what did they say? Why would they disprove anything? Well, they were letters supposedly from Pastor Fagan that said that Lady Hope, didn't visit Darwin, and it was a preposterous story that she wrote, and he attacked her character. He said Darwin didn't return to faith to God, and that she was a trial to her second husband, and that he suffered from her. She was starting a river club with his money, which he didn't agree with, and that later she was bankrupt and broke his heart. I mean, those are some tough things to say, don't you think? He also said that she had asked him for a commendation or a recommendation, and he would not give it to her. And he said, I would not in any way give her one of those, give it to her. And that he said, I have always had considerable uneasiness about her sayings and doings, and I have more to say. Those are pretty drastic words that he wrote, huh? Do you think that Pastor Fagan wrote those words? Well, let's examine them a little bit further. Was this really a hoax, or was the Fagan letters a hoax? Well, Moore later on in his historical perspective basically said that, Elizabeth Cotton, Lady Hope, was undoubtedly there. But he said, did she say, what she said was her account actually truthful? Well, this evangelist here says that it was a preposterous story, that she wasn't a truthful lady. And after he had donated, basically donated Charles had donated to his ministry and all of this, would Fagin really attack Lady Hope's character? Do you think so? Do you think a pastor of a Brethren church would attack her, a woman evangelist? Maybe, but probably not. So, and going on, the account of her second husband, Denny, he was 91 years old when he died, and he died of cardiac syncope, not of neglect. Denny had collaborated with his wife in a coffee house, and it was a shelter for homeless with strict rules and regulations. It was a place where Christians gathered to have Bible studies. Fagin, the Fagin letters, Pastor Fagin says it's a river club. It's a nightclub or a party house. A pastor would not say that when she had a coffee house so that they could have Bible studies in the coffee house. It would be cruel for Fagin to imply that she broke her husband's heart. It was known that he loved this Christian coffee house. In fact, he had been excited about donating the money to it. And it had housed thousands of people, and Fagin was involved in helping housing some of the orphans there himself. So would Pastor Fagin, make fun of and call it a river house? I don't think so. And so after his death, much later, when Lady Hope was around 70 years old, she was swindled by a professional thief who had a record of doing this. But she was still undaunted, and coming to America, kept sharing the Lord. Would Fagin bring this up and say this bankruptcy was because of her? I don't think so. I don't think so. So, and it would be very difficult to believe that she would ask Pastor Fagin for a letter of recommendation. Fagin had little social influence standing and compared to where Lady Hope came from. I mean, she had known plenty of more so-called famous Christians to give her a letter of recommendation. And why would she need a letter of recommendation? I don't think so. She was even friends with the Queen Victoria. So you can imagine, very unlikely. And then he says he was considerably uneasy about her sayings and doings. What are these sayings and doings? Would a pastor say, I'm just uneasy about her sayings and doings? Do you want to know more? Get a hold of me. Who's the accuser of the brethren? Who would accuse her and say her sayings and doings when she had plenty of fruit in everything she did? The construction of the letter was also unusual. It gave defamation of her character and accusations with no evidence at all. And then the writer Fagin also says that he had read about this in a journal called The Tablet. What is a tablet? Come to find out, the Tablet is a Roman Catholic journal that he was reading. And we know that as a pastor of the Brethren Church, he would not be kind to a Roman Catholic journal with tablets of articles in there. So it'd be very unlikely that he'd even be reading a Roman Catholic journal. So, and then Fagin also refers to Emma Darwin as a devout Christian and a sincere Christian. Well, she may have been, that may have been true, but he would also have to say she was a devout Unitarian. So would a pastor of the Plymouth Brethren Church say that about a Unitarian? They're pretty much at odds with each other. Very unlikely. Finally, the last part, and this actually proves that the Fagin letters were totally contrived. So there was a postscript saying, Why did Lady Hope not clear her name from the slur that was made by Francis Darwin? That was clearly a mistake to print, because how would Fagin know about a private letter that was written by Francis Darwin? Would Fagin know about that letter? An evangelical pastor knowing about a private letter from Francis? I think not. He would have to have accessed it, most certainly, somehow. So him even saying that was like, okay, these vegan letters must be contrived in some way with not only the Darwin family, but evolutionists that knew that Francis had written that letter. So, and would a Christian lady want to hire a lawyer? I would say not. She was probably too busy sharing the gospel. Plus, it's really surprising that Fagin, being a Plymouth Brethren pastor, would believe in her taking this all to court, as back in that time, those pastors did not believe in taking Christians to court at all. So it looks to me that the Fagin letters were definitely a hoax. Not Lady Hope hoax, but a Fagin letter hoax that they had contrived to put against and set against Lady Hope's testimony. Isn't that how the enemy goes? In fact, even in churches, putting pastors against pastors, or putting in false information and all these things, and many do happen. But here we have a man, a pastor, that was actually friends with Lady Hope, and they had ministered together. And also saying that she didn't go there, well, most definitely she had stayed with his mother when she was in sorrow of losing her first husband, and that Emma Darwin was coming to see them too. So it's very likely that Elizabeth Cotton, Lady Hope, had talked to Charles Darwin before he died. And plus, Pastor Fagin had ministered to him too. He would never say that that Charles Darwin had never come to the faith. What do we really know that of people? We know as you're sharing the gospel, you don't really know what happens before they die, do you? So anyway, I wanted to present these letters because that is what, Wikipedia goes on. That's what the fact checkers look into. They look into, oh, did you know about the Fagin letters against Lady Hope, and that she was a hoax, and that her character, that she had done these things to her husbands, and that she had ended up bankrupt, and that she was a liar, and all these things. Yeah, enemy will attack us. But the thing is, we can look now in history and see what Lady Hope, who this lady really was, and what she did. The Bible says to examine by the fruit, and she had much fruit. So this next video, I'm going to go in and we're going to just sit back and do a examination, biography, look at the biography of Lady Hope's life. And you'll find it very refreshing. And indeed, I believe Lady Hope was in the room 6 months before ministering to Charles Darwin before he died, 6 months before. And while he was alert and well, he went from being very sad, very upset. In fact, his hands shook, and he was totally upset when he would think about the theory of evolution, like, oh. And then to that point of being filled with joy, the joy of the Lord being his strength. I love the story. So, because it happens today, how Christians get defamed and people lie about them, but be sure the truth will come out, you know. And I think it's pretty amazing that we get to look at a sister in Christ's life and honor her when she was so put aside and so considered a hoax. Now we know. Now we can look at her life the way it truly is or was. When we get to heaven, we're going to meet her.